Okay, so the headline is revealed Kinahan chief Sean McGovern caged in notorious Dubai hellhole. Now, we found out a little bit about where he is going to be incarcerated as he considers and as the system considers, can he fight this extradition? How long has he got? When is he going to come back? We don't know any of the answers to any of that yet. I think certainly the Irish authorities are ready for him whenever they get the call that he's on the way. They're ready for him. But in the meantime, where is he?
Well, as far as we can tell, he's in Dubai Central Prison, also known as the Al Awir prison. So, there's basically one main prison in Dubai.
Yeah.
Dubai is a relatively small statelet, I suppose it is, more than anything. So this is all remand prisoners, particularly the foreigners, are kept in here. It's actually looked on the Dubai. I was looking for it because, of course, you can't really. Dubai is a very funny country if you try and contact press offices and stuff like that. But I was looking at it and they actually put up pictures of prisoners. The police put up pictures of prisoners playing chess and stuff like that. So it looked actually quite nice. Like everything in Dubai looks a bit shiny. But of course, other people have spoken about it in absolutely vastly different terms. Somebody wrote a book about it in the UK, which we quoted, where he said that it was like, there was up to 20 people in a cell that were made for 3 people at times. That, a very, very violent place, a lot of stabbings, guards not getting involved. They were also speaking about,
Does your money buy you anything in these?
Well, I'd say your money buys you something to a degree in nearly all prisons across the world. But in a country like Dubai, where money buys you whatever you want, I would imagine it's not particularly different.
Certainly there was stories about prisoners in the past, in particular one very well-known UK cocaine kingpin who was over there, Carl Fellstrom, the journalist, was telling me about him, and he ended up basically being able to use the system. He used some sort of ancient laws regarding extradition I know what it was. He had bounced a check.
Yeah.
And if you bounce a check, you have to stay in Dubai for 4 years, no matter what. It's a guaranteed sentence. And this was probably, I'm sure this has changed since, because they'd hardly allow it happen again. And it meant that his, whatever extradition proceedings were ongoing to France at the time, ran out of steam.
Yeah.
So he ended up 4 years in this prison in Dubai, but he was basically living in luxury because he was able to afford to pay for it. It's not a great story, really, is it?
No,
when we have
but
Sean McGovern in there and we're hoping for the best.
Well, there was another, obviously we quoted in the weekend from a book written by a guy called Carl Williams, who was jailed for a year in 2012 in Dubai, and he spoke about seeing packs of guards standing by without intervening as inmates attacked each other. He said it was run by prison Russian gangsters, and they would use rape as a means of control. So
scary place.
A scary
He's describing.
place. A scary place.
One way or another, it's going to be very different to what Sean McGovern has been used to over the last 8 years since he started to live in Dubai with his partner Anita Freeman, because he's been used to a life of absolute luxury.
He has. And of course, maybe some of the connections that the Kinahans have built up over in Dubai will help with making his life easier. Certainly, some of the people who get dumped in these prisons, they wouldn't have access to the type of people that McGovern will have. I think one of the really tough things that people have spoken about in Dubai, and of course we had a case of an Irish woman who was the victim of domestic violence and ultimately ended up in a prison. It's accessing how the justice system works in Dubai is so unclear, opaque, or whatever you want to call it, that they can't get answers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think he will also face that. In Ireland, if you get put in prison on remand, you'll have, as we all report on, these regular dates where you get updates, where you get the chance to make submissions. The police are answerable to an independent judiciary. I mean, all of that in Dubai, it just You know, it just doesn't
I was going to
really
say something
exist.
stupid there. I was going to say, you know, the high profile nature of him, surely that things will run smoothly. But if you look at far more high profile characters like Raphael Imperiale, like Eden Gassanin. Eden Gassanin was put into custody in the Emirates and was released. Eden Gassanin being the head of the Tito and Dino cartel, a guy suspected of corrupting officials in his own country, and somebody who was very much named as one of the heads of the European super cartel. He's sanctioned, isn't he?
He is sanctioned by the US Treasury formally, along with the Kinahans. I think the same reward has gone on his head, the $5 million bounty. But he obviously, again, like Daniel Kinahan, he certainly had ties within the political establishment in Dubai. So, like, Sean McGovern will be subject to courts and law officials, but there's no doubt that in a country like Dubai, like, it's going to be a political justice system. So a politician will make a decision and then the courts will find the legal language to justify it one way or another. There'll just be some who only knows who this individual is who'll decide Sean McGovern's fate, and that could be on a whim. It could be on, as you said, on the basis of financial reward, or it could be because they've, you know, the Dubai officials now are getting sick. And I really do think this is a big factor of it. They're getting sick every time somebody writes about Dubai or dirty money or money laundering. The Kinahans, they copy and paste what they've written about the Kinahans before and plough it in. And I think that's going to be a big factor. And I think the fact that we have to congratulate the Irish authorities for keeping the pressure on and forcing a decision to be made.
So the Irish authorities are very confident that McGovern's coming home, right?
Yeah.
And they have said from the beginning he could be home in 24 hours, or we could have this, you know, extradition arguments through the courts, which they don't seem to be too worried about. They do believe that he's going to be on a plane home very shortly anyway. But Rada Sterling, CEO of Detained in Dubai, who's an expert in contesting Interpol red notices, doesn't believe it's so simple.
No, I mean, Detained in Dubai are a very well-known group. They have, you know, we've seen a lot of them actually. If you Google them, you'll see them involved in a lot of cases of British people who've ended up in prison. A lot of them for sort of minor offences like public drunkenness or, you know, sexual misdemeanors or whatever, and you can find yourself locked up. And so these are kind of a lobby group that try and help them through this justice system. It's certainly been said that again, Rada said effectively that you can't. There is no guarantees because it's a murky legal system.
It's unpredictable, she says.
It's unpredictable. And I think the only thing that's predictable is that, you know, it's not going to be, the decision is not going to be based solely on legal understanding.
And just to quote Rada Sterling, because she says, some have been extradited and some have not. South Africa had been quite upset about the Gupta brothers. These were Atul and Rajesh Gupta, wanted for political corruption in South Africa, and they fought successfully to avoid extradition. So, and she says, who I understand they have been after for quite a long time. They were expecting a more streamlined extradition and they didn't get it. There have been other cases where requesting countries have tried to extradite and they've been given a no, and that could be on the basis the courts there don't believe there's sufficient evidence or they don't believe a crime's been committed. So, yeah.
But I think, obviously, the Irish authorities believe that they've already gone through all of them hoops.
They do.
And that a decision has been made to extradite McGovern by the Dubai officials. And it doesn't really matter what happens in the courts. That can wend its way through and a few arguments can be made. I think that they believe that
they've already been through these bureaucratic tape. I think so too.
I think
they were asked over and over again for more and more paperwork, and they eventually, I think, believe that they have everything in place. And we know that the Justice Minister, Helen McEntee, was also in touch, got involved in this. And this is kind of like our test case for Daniel Kinahan.
It's a big test case because it's a murder charge.
Yeah.
And Daniel could face that as well. And if you can extradite one person from Dubai to Ireland to face a murder charge, you could certainly, there'd be very little justification for not doing it to a second.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're also looking at the relationship between Daniel Kinahan and Sean McGovern and where it developed. And I had been doing a little bit of writing this week, and a little bit of thinking.
Yeah.
And a little bit of research and dusting down all my old files. And I have come to the conclusion, and I have written about this, that I think that the point where McGovern and Daniel Kinahan become really close is just in the months after the Regency Hotel, when this very strange thing happened. So basically, if we can remind ourselves, so February of 2016, in literally weeks after it, this sort of Twitter site, which is now called X, popped up, and it was called @SirSean.
Yeah.
And it featured a picture of that anonymous mask and started to detail all aspects of the Regency Hotel attack. Named people the likes of Jonathan Dowd all very early in the proceedings, when nobody really knew him as anyone other than an ex-Sinn Féin councillor and a businessman. He was photographed on the site, and he was detailed as one of the attackers, basically. Obviously, many years later, he pleaded guilty in courts to his role in the Regency Hotel. But there was other sort of stuff. It was inflammatory, the site. It used to sort of tag journalists and others, and including Daniel Kinahan and Gary Finnegan and others in the cartel, who were always being sort of tagged and alerted to these comments that were being made. The site, whoever was behind it, was contacting journalists personally through encrypted emails. The individual was claiming to be an intelligence officer, just floating out there in the ether, somebody who was interested in Christy Kinahan Sr. and others. There was always this promise that, you know, if we can build up a relationship sort of thing and give each other a little bit of information, then I can give you something. And of course, the big prize was a photograph that appeared on the site of Christy Kinahan Sr. in Hong Kong with the Financial Times under his arm, and it was watermarked @SirSean or something at the time. And this was sort of been given as the little, the carrot.
Yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary time, of course, when you look back on it. But I mean, I suppose it was the first sophisticated attempt to use the internet, really, to get involved in propaganda on behalf of the Kinahan Cartel. Obviously, the initial Regency attack, if you remember, in the aftermath at David Byrne's funeral, you had a really show of unity between the Byrne organised crime group and the Kinahans. Daniel attended the funeral, stood as a guest of, right up the top. There was an absolute merging of the groups to come up with a response. Although the organisations were obviously, they were sort of managed separately, I suppose. At that point then you saw this huge crossover. And obviously Sean McGovern became that point of contact, I think, with Daniel.
I think he ended up with a foot in either camp. And of course, this, @SirSean, it was actually closed down. And it re-emerged at Sear Scryer very quickly after it. It had sort of days before, I found very significant, the murder of Noel King-Size Duggan. It had accused him of being a deep throat. It had called him out at a time where he was really sort of a sleeping, like he wasn't really in the mix, or hadn't really been out and about as a kind of a noted crime figure. He was a friend, an old-time friend of the monks, hadn't even gone to the funeral of the monk's brother, Eddie, and all of a sudden he was being called out, and days later he was murdered. Now, one posting on the site had read, I mean, this was the kind of way it was being written: Hutch Kinahan feud, who are in most danger of being liquidated next, reports coming in hourly. Yeah. Liquidated is very much a word used in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a Facebook page and there was this website, and people, there was lengthy sort of articles written on these that those who contacted them would be sent privately on their email addresses. Yeah. And the articles were about the origins of the feud within the Kinahan organisation.
I mean, it was designed up. It was done up like
a newsletter.
Yeah, like a proper. Somebody had laid it out as properly done it up. The pictures and headlines.
And that's what made it confusing, because it was written in a very journalistic style. Some of the information that it was releasing was only, Gardaí believed, with them, but of course, what they were discovering the Kinahan grouping already knew
Yes.
who was involved in the regions. They all knew one another. So, the guards were kind of coming a step after them. But I suppose the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation did start to investigate properly, and they got help from the cyber unit of the Gardaí. What they discovered was this site was being run on the Tor darknet.
Yeah.
And it was using scrambled...
the email was, I think, a Proton email, wasn't it? Which is that it uses, it disguises its IP address. It disguises the location of the IP address. It basically comes up with a new IP address every time.
Yeah, they were scrambling it through Holland and Canada. And with the Silk Road, I remember this being described to me, the Silk Road eventually was sort of uncovered, the people behind it, because you had to log off every time you used it. But one time the Silk Road was left logged on in an internet cafe or wherever it had been used. And that led the police to those behind it. But in the case of Sear Screer, formerly Sarah Sean, it always logged off. They never once made a mistake on it. Now, basically, the investigation discovered that behind this and running this site was Sean McGovern on behalf of Daniel Kinahan. And that basically it was a propaganda arm of the Kinahan Cartel. It was also in existence to try and gather information because, say, for example, Sir Sean or Sear Screer, whatever we'd call it, was in communication with journalists, maybe, I don't know, other people interested. I don't think probably cops, but maybe there were some out there that were contacting them. And what it was doing was giving one piece of information to, say, 100 different email addresses. And that piece of information looked valuable and relevant. And it looked as if, wow, I better give something back here. And there might have been a question at the end of it. A lot of the questions coming from them was, is there warrants for this person's arrest? Is there warrants for that person's arrest? So they were putting out the same piece of information 100 times and likely getting back up to 100 pieces of information.
Yeah, in
return.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's 100% true. They knew the word on the street from the criminal underworld, but it was an attempt, I think, to find sources of information beyond that basically into official Ireland. It was full of conspiracies as well, mixed in, and there was a few people focused on that. In the fullness of time, you see, I've almost, nothing to do with it. But it also, in the mix of all of that, was some really deep reality as well. So it was agendas. There was a lot of kind of, remember there was over and over again this narrative that, if Patsy Hutch dies, this feud ends. And that was kind of coupled with the similar graffiti in the North Inner City. But of course, everybody knew that the feud wasn't going to end if one person died. I think the Kinahan organisation couldn't get anywhere near Patsy Hutch because while he was one of their top targets, he was... the threat level against him was so critical that there was actually a Garda car parked outside his house for almost 7 years. Yeah. And he was certainly being communicated with at all times by the Gardaí, who were repeatedly telling him his life was in danger. And it was difficult for the Kinahan organisation to get near him, but they knew that his own could get near him and probably his own community could get near him. Yeah. And of course they were paying people within the community, neighbours, etc., for information on certainly some of the Hutch targets. So it was a really dirty war. But it was that sort of sowed the seeds between... It allowed McGovern put one foot in the Kinahan camp and keep one foot in the Byrne camp where he had originated. Yeah. He was really a lowly lieutenant, essentially, of Liam Byrne, even though he was very, trusted. He was nearly almost like family within the Byrnes network. But that foot in Daniel Kinahan's camp gave him an opportunity, and he was ambitious and is ambitious, McGovern, and he saw it as an opportunity to really sort of feed Kinahan and become his close associate and his close friend. In December of 2016, when Noel Duckegg Kerwin was shot dead, in the aftermath of that murder, McGovern believed he was going to be picked up and arrested, and he headed for Dubai with his family, with his partner Anita Freeman and his children, and he was welcomed in Dubai by Kinahan. Yeah, which a lot of people weren't, if you remember. People like Trevor Byrne and various others, they had to go and live in the UK or parts of Spain and look after themselves financially and eke their own living, maybe get a bit of work, but nothing like they are even people who were relatively close to Daniel Kinahan. It was really only Sean McGovern who was welcomed with open arms. He was put up in an apartment that Daniel Kinahan had lived in at one stage. So he had a totally different relationship. But if you look before the Regency, the people Daniel Kinahan had around him, a lot of them were from the North Inner City that had been pals with Gary Hutch and people like that. And Sean McGovern, through all of that time, he wasn't one of the guys going out to Port-au-Banús. He wasn't one of the guys spending time out there. So yeah, it was a big change, I think.
But I think Kinahan saw him as a soulmate. I think they became, you see, Gary Hutch and Daniel Kinahan were like, people used to joke and say they had a bromance. They lived together. Yeah. They used to, throw themselves up onto the couch in the evening, couple of beers, watch movies together. They were really, really close. They shared absolutely everything. And they fell out. And when Gary Hutch died, like Daniel Kinahan lost his soulmate as such, his best friend, his best male friend. I'm not suggesting there was anything else between them in any way, shape or form. But so he was kind of like a bit of a lost soul as such by the time the Regency happened. He had been attacked a number of times. He knew there was a bullet with his name on it. And he was sort of almost vulnerable to McGovern's charms, shall we say. Now, by the time they're sanctioned by the Department of Treasury in the US, they describe McGovern as, and I quote, Daniel Kinahan's advisor and closest confidant. Evidence indicates that all dealings with Daniel Kinahan go through Sean McGovern, who managed communications on behalf of Daniel Kinahan. So by this time, which is 2022, and bear in mind he's, 6 years out in Dubai at this stage, he is the buffer to Daniel Kinahan. Yeah. Anybody who wants to talk to him, anybody who has a message coming from him, either way, he is his main man.
For his criminality, because for a lot of that time, Daniel was dealing with the boxers, was dealing with the promoters, but McGovern was the link man for the criminality. Like, it's a really old strategy. I think in New York, wasn't there, in the mafia guys, they used to just have one person the mafia don would talk to, nobody else about criminality. And there was one guy, he didn't speak to somebody for 20 years. He just accepted these tiny little notes and then pulled them up. So that, I think that was a kind of an attempt to firewall that bit of the business. Obviously, Daniel Kinahan had these guys around him like Gary Hutch who were capable of much risk-taking, people that could have great respect on the streets of Dublin. But I think by the time he got to Dubai, he needed somebody with a bit more intelligence and a bit more organisational ability. And obviously Sean McGovern fit that pattern as well. So yeah, it's all of that, of course, is going to come back and haunt him now. Or will it come back and haunt Daniel, of course, because Sean McGovern is going to be brought back here and questioned about everything that Daniel ever did to him. I mean, I think the really interesting bit of it all now will be, do they have further encrypted phone messages from their time in Dubai? We know there is some stuff from Ireland. We've heard that in various cases. But we still don't know if in the recent hacks that have gone on, have the Kinahans been picked up on that? Will that form part of the Garda attempts to extradite Daniel Kinahan? And will his interactions with Sean McGovern be part of that?
In the meantime, McGovern is bedding down with up to 20 people in a cell in Dubai's main prison. And
he's actually quite close to where Daniel is living as well, because he probably could. He probably could.
Loyalty, if you ask me, in that world is only skin deep.
Yes. Well.
Right. Well, look, we'll be back to this, and we will continue with any updates we have on the McGovern situation, any proceedings around the extradition. And as our friends in law enforcement say, who knows, he could be back tomorrow.
He could be.
Thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe.
Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.